okay? So let me invite Andrea up. What am I doing? I need to close that down. Guess I'm just going to change the setup so I can have you in the big box with me. Yes, Debs, we'll do that because then I just need to invite guests. It just stops all of the other questions. Right, I've invited you up. Oh, I'm on split screen. Oh, why is it doing like that? Hello.
Hi.
You okay?
Yeah, okay. How are you?
Does the screen look really funny to you or just to me?
No.
Or is it normal?
I think so.
Yeah, maybe it's me. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, Hayley. Busy day.
I thought we just, I know I've interviewed you before on your channel. I know we spoke loads, but there are some people that still don't know Georgina's story. So I thought we would just start from basics. Like, obviously, you're Georgina's mum. Can you just tell us a little bit about who Georgina was, like who she was as a child, who she was just before she went missing, and just give us some background on her?
Yeah. Georgina was 30 when she went missing, but we had been living she grew up in Libya. Her dad was Libyan, but Georgina was born in the UK. We all lived there till she was about 10 years old, and then we come back to live here with my family. I'm born here. She went to school here. Georgina was a really happy child, intelligent and bright. She loved animals. She loved cooking. But Georgina acquired bulimia when she was about 13. Secretly, we wasn't aware of it at the time, and she had had it a few years before we actually found out. But Georgina sort of managed this all her life, really. I spoke to her about getting some help for it, and she sort of just said, yes, I will. It wasn't until I would say a few years before she went missing that she spoke to me several times, and I realised that it did bother her, and she was quite worried about it. I wasn't really aware of how sort of bad bulimia was, really. I just thought it was, you made yourself sick and that was it. But I wasn't aware of the extent of what it was until sort of the past few years, really. And that I wasn't aware that it was a mental health illness as well. Also until more recently, after she went missing. But Georgina had 2 boys with her partner. She did have quite, from her teenage years at school, she sort of, I wouldn't say got into trouble, but she was quite rebellious and things, and did lots of teenage things, I suppose. When you look back, I did things as well when I look back. But as mothers, you want the best, and you want your child to go on the right way. But she met her partner. She had 2 children, and she seemed fine. She was an amazing mom. She made her own jam. She was, everything seemed fine. She was just a really lovely mom. A couple of years into that relationship, I was aware that there was something not quite right, because Georgina seemed controlled. I had to ask if I could go and visit her there, and in between work, I'd have to text and ask her, could I come and visit? I wanted to see my grandson, and she'd have to ask her partner. But I wasn't aware of the extent of what was going on there as well at that time. And then one night she just rang me up about 2 years later, 2 years into this relationship, and she just said, I'm leaving, I'm not staying, and come and pick up my things and my children. And I did, and I brought her back to my house, and she stayed here for a couple of months. And then I asked her dad, who we were divorced, I asked if he would help try and get a flat, maybe be the guarantor of a flat for her. And we did. We helped her get a flat and get her settled in. And she was okay. I think she struggled with this new life as well, where she was single all of a sudden. I think Georgina probably needed more structure in her life than she needed to live by that structure, really. So she had this life where she didn't have anybody telling her what to do and things. And it wasn't until after that time that I realised that there was like DV going on there and in this relationship. But she sort of got on with her life. Unfortunately, Georgina, the partner, he wasn't very nice, and he was doing lots of things and spying on her and things like that. So we ended up with going to court with lots of problems like that. And they ended up sharing the care. The boys used to come here for a long weekend and with her, and then they'd go for the rest of the week with him. I think that really it spiked Georgina's behaviour quite a bit, and that I think she did start drinking quite a bit. Not to addiction or anything like that, as some people say. I've heard so many stories and that, but it wasn't like that. It was just when the boys wasn't there, she sought out friends to spend time with, because she didn't want to be by herself. I mean, me and her sisters, the ones that were still living here, we worked, and I worked an awful lot, and sort of wasn't here that much. And she didn't like being by herself, Georgina. She wanted to be with people. She didn't like being by herself. So she did spend a lot of time with friends if she didn't have her children here. The previous year, in 2017, she got back with her Albanian boyfriend, and who she'd known about 5 or 6 years. And he was always sort of like, the good guy who, if she had any problems or she needed a tenner or anything like that, she'd always phone him, and he was always the one that would sort of be there. But he was sort of always there for everybody as well, one of those types. And she moved in with him, but it didn't really work out because he was also helping out
everyone.
Yeah. She didn't really, and he was quite controlling as well. When she used to come to my house, she'd have to put her phone on and keep it on. It would be on the coffee table, and this sort of FaceTime would be on, and I'd be saying, "What's that?" And she'd say, "Oh, and sort of at the time, I didn't really realise. I don't know. When I look back at it now, I think, why was you stupid? Why didn't you realise sort of some of these things were going on? But I just didn't, She'd just go, "Oh, shush, Mum." And he just wants to know I'm here at your house and things. And, so I think she had a bit of a pattern this with her relationships with these type, attracting these type. And then that sort of ended after 6 months, and she met the partner who she was with when she when she went missing. She'd been with him about 6 months. Wasn't that long after that I'd had a few messages during the night to say that the relationship wasn't going well. They'd been arguing, they'd been fighting, etc. And she wanted to try and start a life by herself, but she loved it. She did love him, but she knew that she wasn't going to, have a future and have the life with her children if she stayed in this relationship. So it was sort of in the pipeline. She was sort of started looking at moving out of Worthing, maybe to Brighton, where she was at. She said, "If I stay here, I don't think I'll leave him, because I still love him," and things like that. I think they had an argument and a few weeks before, and then she phoned me again and said, "Can you come and pick up my stuff?" Which I did. I I went round and all the stuff was piled into my car, and then she just went, oh, I'll be back after, and then she never come back for a few days. And I sort of texted her and said, where are you? I was a little bit annoyed at the time because,
I can imagine.
I thought, and I'd said to her, I'll try and help you. And if I can find a place, I'll try and help you with your deposit, and things, and move you and that. And so I was like, well, I've just moved all your stuff and now you're not even coming back. And so I didn't, I just thought, okay, maybe she's trying to sort it out. And anyway, she stayed there for a few days. And then I got a few messages and pictures of dinner and things, and this is what she was cooking, so I didn't say anything. And then she come back up when the boys were coming up on the long weekend, and I picked her up. She was quite quiet, but she never really said much about it, and I just said, have you heard from him? And she just said no. And then she said she was going to look at some accommodation in Port Slade, which is in between Worthing and Brighton, and that was the Sunday night. And she went and had a look and then come back. She was on the phone quite a bit, but she was really happy. She was in a really happy mood, and she was laughing. And she come back and she said to me, "Oh my God, it was like this. You went through this shop and there was a curtain on the back of it, and there was no privacy." And we sort of laughed about it. And I just said, "Oh, don't want that." And she just sort of said, "Oh, the guy seemed a bit pervy," and and I said, "No, just don't, no, just." Sort of jumping into another problem, and then that was it. And then she said, oh, I'm going to try and get a lift to Brighton. And she was sort of in and out and on the phone and this, and at the time I worked 3 nights and 3 days, and so I was sort of quite tired on that Sunday night, and I was upstairs in my bedroom sort of trying to sleep. I could hear, and I think I text down to her, can you be quiet, a few times. Georgina was really loud as well sometimes, especially if she had a drink, and she was quite loud. She was on the phone, she was always chatting on the phone, and I heard the front door go a few times, and then tried to sleep. It was only the police that actually told me that she did actually get a lift to Brighton that night, but they never knew who gave her the lift. They never found out. I don't know why they didn't, but they just said, we do believe she did get a lift, but we've never known the source of the lift, maybe through her mobile phone data or something. And she was there Monday, so she was back, but she went out and she was back when I woke up, and she was back and she was asleep. Okay. And Monday she went to Brighton Monday night, and she was going to stay with this old boyfriend of hers who was working in Brighton. He worked in a takeaway, so she was going to stay there the night, so that the next day she could do she was going to try and look at this accommodation. She was going to sort of do things in Brighton. She said, oh, if I stay here, I won't get to Brighton early, so I'm going to see if I can stay there. So she went to Brighton in the evening, I think about 8, I think it was, and then that was it. From what was put together, the friend wasn't finishing work till 3 a.m, so she was sort of wandering in and out from where he worked to a shops across the road, and this is where she got talking to a guy in the shop across the road. It was like one of those, not Tesco's Express, but Budgeons or something. And she got talking to him. It was around 11 p.m, I believe. And they were talking about accommodation and things like that. And he said, oh, my landlord has lots of flats in this area. This is where the link was. Because she was actually on the Tuesday night, when she got back on the Tuesday, they found 60 messages between her and him. Okay. I think it was between like 1 and 3 or 4. And they said they thought it was, quite a lot. 6. And I said, well, when you're chatting, like texting, yes, no, maybe, you can easily rack up. You can easily rack up when you're sort of chatting to someone, I said. Anyway, they approached the person. He said he didn't know Georgina, never met, he didn't know her. And they knew they'd got all these messages. I said, what was the context of these messages? You know, can you tell me? They just said, well, chit chat really. I said, well, did it say about meeting? Was there any arrangement? He said, no, it wasn't that. It was a little bit flirty, but just talking about accommodation, what you doing, things like that. There was nothing in it. But he'd said he didn't know her and that he lived by himself. Excuse me.
Okay.
So they went to where he lived, sort of looked around the area, spoke to the neighbours. The neighbour said he lived with a friend. So they come back to him, and obviously he'd already lied. He said he didn't know her, and they've got the messages, and he'd also lied saying that he lived by himself. So they arrested both of them on suspicion of murder, which they didn't tell us until over like a week or 10 days later. They didn't tell us this is going on. They didn't tell us at all. We were like shocked. Because we had a meeting with them, they sat down and just said, oh, no, this is what went on, but we kept them for 48 hours, but, you know, we don't believe there's any link at all. We believe that the guy just lied because his friend who was staying with him didn't have a work permit to work here. And he lied because he got scared, and that's why he lied and said he didn't know Georgina. He said he didn't know Georgina really. He'd only sort of met her in the shop that night, but he just lied, and that was it. He said, but we're pretty sure that these two, you know, what they've told us is true, but we're keeping them on, you know, sort of on bail, like for a month, and just that was it. And then after that, they just said they've been released, and there's nothing. We're sure that, you know, these two guys have got like 2 or 3 jobs each, and just don't believe that there's any link. So that was that. But she was when her friend did finish work that night on the Tuesday night. He didn't finish till about 3 o'clock. And they walked down to the Royal Albion Hotel on the seafront and had a drink and sat there in the foyer. They was seen on CCTV there. The police saw it. I asked if I could see it, but they said no because of GDPR, and there's other people around by them because they were sitting on these sofas, but they just said they were seen there. And then she was seen getting back on the train at Brighton Station early that morning. She phoned me that morning from the train. It was around 7 a.m. to say that could I pick her up from the station, and so I went to pick her up. And when I went to pick her up, she'd already walked. So I was a bit annoyed because I got back to the house and she was at the house, and so I just let her in, and that was it. I went to work and I come back about 6. And she was in bed. She was asleep. And I went back out again and then come back in at 9, and she was in the bedroom. I could hear her talking at that time on the phone, and then it went quiet and the light went off, so I never went in there. And then I went up to bed. Because I'd worked the night before that day and gone on to work as well. So I got up to bed then. The police said that why did she call me at 3 a.m? And I said, and why didn't I answer it? And I said, I was not aware that she called me, and maybe I had it on quiet or, you know, or something because I'd gone to sleep. And that was it.
I got up when she made that call to you. So you were both in the house. You were both in the house when she made that call.
Yeah. Often, sometimes, because my bedroom was upstairs and hers was down. Often, like any of my girls sometimes would do that if I was upstairs.
I phone mine for dinner. I'm like, come down for dinner. Go fill up the hollering. I get it.
On the Wednesday morning, I got up. It was around 6:30. She was already up. She'd obviously gone to sleep and got up sort of at midnight or something.
Right, okay.
Then was up because she'd slept all day the previous day, and then was sort of up most of the night, and that's where she was chatting to this guy. And when I come down, she just said, oh, my phone's not working. She was quite agitated about it. My phone's not working properly. How am I going to do all my things? I want, look for a comment, do this. And she said, have you got another? I said, what's wrong with it? Because it had been like that for a week or so, and she sort of mentioned it. So the week before, I said to her dad, I said, do you think you could buy her a phone this time? Because I'm always sort of doing everything, you know. And so he just said, okay. And he told me he'll get her one, like a sort of cheap one. And I said to her, well, your dad's getting one, isn't he, for you? I gave her an old one. I found an old one of mine in my drawer, and this is where she came to have 2 phones in her bag, and people were saying, oh, she's got loads of phones. She had 2. She had her own one and my old one.
Okay.
Where she was sitting down on the floor that morning, so she opened the back of her phone and she took the SIM card out to put it into my one, but it didn't fit because it was one was a micro and the other one wasn't. It didn't fit. So she, instead of putting everything back, she just put like all this phone in pieces, both of them, they're in pieces with the backs off of that, into this carrier bag. And like, sort of, because she was straightening her hair at the time, and then she just put it like into the carrier bag. And I said, what are you doing today? And she said, oh, I'm going into town. I'm going to go to the job centre. I'm going to go to Citizen Fire. I've got to see. And she said, oh, and I said, well, see if you can get one of those SIM cards. You can get them sometimes for like a couple of pounds. Might fit one of those. My phone. It'll do you for now. That's how she come to have the 2 phones.
Okay.
So that was. She asked me if I had a couple of pounds. I gave her that, and I left for work. Love you, mummy. Love you, and that was it. That was the last words I ever.
Last time I saw her.
Last time I ever saw her. There wasn't anything that I ever, that I thought, oh, she's acting strange or anything. She was a bit agitated, but I think that was because the phone, phone's everything to a lot of people, isn't it? A phone. If you haven't got a phone, then you're sort of stuck.
Yeah.
But there wasn't anything that I would think, oh, she's acting strange, or there wasn't anything different where I thought, well, why is she behaving like that? She's acting weird, or there was just nothing. It was just sort of normal Georgina, and that was it. And I went to work, and that was it. Come back later. I didn't think about it because, she went off and stayed with friends. I come home, went to bed, that was it. She wasn't here. Still didn't think about it for a few days, and then her sister said, oh, isn't Georgina? I said, no, she hasn't come back. And it was sort of quite normal.
Yeah.
I thought, to be honest, oh, she's at the boyfriend's house, and she doesn't want to.
30. She was 30
back there. She doesn't want to tell me that because I'd said to her a few days before, I thought you were leaving him. I brought all your stuff back, and and there was I was washing all her things, every single thing. I was washing it all and putting it away, and thinking I was doing something good. And then she sort of back there, and I just said to her, I thought you was leaving. I thought you was trying to get yourself together and your life on track, and that. And she sort of didn't really say anything. So I thought in the beginning, oh, she's annoyed with me because I said that, and she doesn't want to say no. She's round there, so I never thought of anything. 3 or 4 days later, her sister saying, oh, it's strange, haven't heard from George. I said, oh no. I said, it is a bit weird, but I kept texting her and I wasn't getting a reply, and it didn't say read or anything like that. I was going on to the Facebook Messenger and sending her, you're all right, you okay, are you annoyed with me or something? And nothing. Her sisters text her, and we just thought, oh, it's just a bit weird. Like, not that hasn't come back, it's that she hasn't sent a message to us or anything. And I think, I can't remember when, maybe 4 or 5 days, we all started sort of said we'll do list of her friends on her contact list, and sort of contact them and ask if she's there with them. And that's sort of what we did then. We all had this list, we all made a list, and sort of my other 3 daughters sort of, we'll do that, you'll do that. Then I phoned me and her older sister Sarah. We tried to phone hospitals. I said, maybe she's had an accident or something like that. And, and I said, let's try and phone the hospitals. And we did try and phone all the hospitals in Sussex, and some of them wouldn't tell us. They said, we're not allowed to tell you you know, it's GDPR and that. There was only a couple of them that sort of said no, there's nobody of that name here. And that sort of took our time, really, because people didn't respond straight away. These friends or acquaintances or whoever didn't respond. Some of them never responded at all. So we were sort of waiting, and then sort of by the end of that week, she didn't come back for her when the boys were here, and I thought, this isn't normal. She would have at least phoned. Even if she couldn't get there for some reason, she would have phoned me and said, or if she was ill or something. And I said, oh, look, let's give it another day, and if we still don't see her, she doesn't turn up, we'll call the police. But, you know, I think that week we just thought, we can't ring the police because we don't think she's missing. We just think that she's with some people. Maybe she went to a party and that, and she's sort of just staying there. And I don't know. It was just, you know. And then by that weekend, her sister Sonia said, oh, I think we should phone the police, Mum. At least they can find out but the things that we can't. Because we've sort of come to a lot of people wasn't responding to us. They just wasn't like, and that was it. Then we phoned the police and they came round, took all the details and things. And I think it didn't get moved to major crime until 3 weeks when they checked her bank account. And I said to them, I phoned the bank myself and I said, can you tell? And they said, we're not allowed to, you're not allowed to, you know, tell you. I said, well, all I want to know is where she's used her debit card, so then at least we know where she is. I'm still thinking that she's somewhere. And you know, I said, if she's in Brighton, it will tell us what was used at that bank or that shop, that machine. So then the police said they had to get a warrant to do that, and that took a few days. And then they called me in and they said that, oh, we've been to the bank and that one. And there's been she hasn't used her bank. She hasn't used anything. She hasn't used her card since the day before when she'd come back from the station. And I was there and I said, oh, that's not Georgina. You know, if she's got money in her account. If she hasn't, then it's different.
Yes.
But she had money in her account then. And I said, that's strange. And they said then that we're moving it to major crime now. And then that night they said, we need to do a forensic check of your house. And I said, that's fine. And we're going to do a check of the boyfriend's house. And then could you not speak to him till we've done it? So they did that. They just took from my house. They took things. They went and looked all through her things that were there. And they took DNA and things from her hairbrush and toothbrush and things. They looked through sort of papers and documents she had, things like notebooks and that with scribbles on anything that might be of use. And they just sort of took them. And then the next day they came back, and then me and her sisters, I think that it was about 4 hours, did a sort of a different statement. We went through lots of things, and then they asked about some of the things that they'd taken. What do you think this could be? They found a sort of a bit of a map drawn of somewhere, and I said, I think that's really old, that. But and yeah, so that's how that was sort of the beginning, really. But even at that time, we still never thought she was missing. We just thought she's going to come back knocking on the door, and every weekend or whatever, we'd think she's just going to come knocking on the door now, and you know, with some silly excuse, and so we wouldn't be annoyed, and that was it. And it sort of never happened. Even at the Christmas that year, you know, nearly 9 months later, I mean, we laid the table for her. We all brought a present, and and I said, we're all going to buy a present. You know, imagine if she turns up and we haven't included her, how she would feel like, you know. And so we all bought presents. We laid the table for her. We sat at there sort of, and it was quite tense that Christmas, because like we were sort of eating and thinking, oh, anytime now you get waiting for cars, she's going to turn up, and of course no one's going to say anything. We'll just be pleased that she's turned up. but it never happened, and it sort of, and every, we all, it was like, oh well, she didn't turn up, and that was it. And then the next year we sort of did the same, but I think it was the feeling was a bit different. I think we just did it for doing it. We didn't feel like she might turn up, but sort of hope
Did it for the boys.
Gone a bit. But we did it for the boys. I did it for the boys for a few years with presents, and I got them to buy little presents as well, for mummy, and I think last year was the only time. Alfie did. He bought a little necklace, and we didn't lay the table because I thought it just didn't seem right. Keep laying this place for mummy, at the Christmas table. So we didn't do it last year.
How old were the boys when Georgina went missing?
7 and 8 they were. They were 7 and 8 now 13 and 14 now. So it's quite a big transition because they were quite little young boys then. Now teenagers. I think I don't really understand their thinking process about it, because one of them will still say, when mummy comes back, can we go to that park again?
Yeah.
When she comes, and I think do you really think that? Sometimes I have said, look, mummy might not come back. In the beginning, I think the first couple of years, we would light candles of love, the hope candles, sort of a couple of times a week. We'd do like prayer meditations and hold hands and hope for mummy to come back. We'd let off balloons. We still do things like that on her birthday and the anniversary. We'll let off balloons and write things on them and let them off and say that, mummy, wherever you are, we miss you and things. We still do that on the anniversary and the birthday. But we used to do the hope candles like sort of when they were staying here, like all the time, nearly every day. And but after a couple of years, I thought I can't just keep them living on this sort of wave of hope for years and years, because I didn't want it to get to a point where when they were older, when they'd sort of turn around and say, well, Nan, you told us that she was, we would live in hope and she would come. I'm on the live, Hayden. Right, hurry up then. So then I sort of incorporated them. Maybe get the water jug then. Right, just take the jug with you right to the bedroom. Right, and take the jug with you, Hayden. I'm getting up. Right. Right. Love you.
Oh.
So yeah, I thought I can't just keeping this hope thing. I had to some point say, something might have happened to mummy. She might not come back, and they just wasn't accepting it. They just sort of like, no, mum's going to come back. Mummy's, I know she's going to come back. Now I don't know. They had one of them had some sort of counselling through the Missing People charity. It was more like he was chatting really, but he didn't really chat in the beginning. He didn't chat about his mum. He just chatted about all his school friends and brought all his teddies and things into the story and that. And it wasn't until the last few weeks he had with her that he sort of mentioned it a bit. But even with then he sort of said about, when my mummy comes back, we're going to do this and we're going to go there again. But she said, the counsellor said to me, it may just be his coping mechanism, that's the way he's coping with it. He doesn't want to, because he doesn't know what happened to his mum. That's the way he wants to.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah. She said it might take them quite a few years if we never find out. It might take them quite a few years to actually sort of comprehend anything. Or they might not. They might just be coping with it well, and they might not. But it might be well into their adulthood, and before they before it sort of really affects them. You don't know.
Hopefully, we just have to hope for some answers. Can I just ask, is Georgina's case still classed as a missing person, or is it a murder investigation?
No, classed as a no-body homicide.
Homicide.
In 2019, in 2019, I think it was around June, there was a new SIO assigned to the case, because before that it had all been a bit, I would say, higgledy-piggledy, because each time it would be, Miles Ockwell's the SIO, and then it would be Giles York, and then we'd be introduced to somebody else, and he was in charge of the Sussex and Surrey major crime, and it was a bit like, well, who's in charge, like the first year. And then in June, I think June 2019, we were told that Andy Wolstenholme was being appointed the SIO, and then he introduced himself and he said that he needed time to go through it all, and he was the new SIO. And then we had a meeting with him in August 2019, and that's when he showed us the Chapel Road CCTV.
Is that the shop?
That's not the shop. The first one we had seen when, not long after she went missing, they had the Clifton Road, the shop, which is about 10 minutes from where we live. We had that, but after that, it wasn't until 2019 we were shown the Chapel Road, which is in the town centre.
The two girls.
The two girls. And Andy, he showed us on his laptop, he said, we've found this on the peripheral town centre CCTV. And we were sort of quite shocked, and he said, do you think that's Georgina? And we looked, and we sort of just kept looking at it. I think we must have watched it 30-40 times, and said, well, yes, that's her. And I think because we were in such shock, we'd never asked, where's this come from, or anything like that. It wasn't spoken of, and it wasn't until a couple of months later they put an appeal out as well and we put appeals out for that. And then afterwards he said that we're not sure if this is Georgina, we can't corroborate it, because we can't actually see her face, we can only see the side of her, and there's no other CCTV or anything. And I said, well, I can tell that's my daughter, and my other daughter said, I can tell that's my sister, the way she walks, that's definitely her. And when I said, well, isn't there any other CCTV, there's the bus that would have had, yes, they would have done, but because this CCTV is now 18 months old, there isn't, they can't find any of that. They didn't actually tell us at the time that this CCTV had been retrieved in April 2018.
Right, okay.
And obviously put somewhere, but it hadn't been looked at because they didn't think that Georgina had gone to the town, the team, that they didn't. And, we kept saying, well, she's, that's where she said she was going. Oh, they said they'd gone to mobile phone shops and spoken to quite a few mobile phone shops, and none of them had seen her. So they decided that she hadn't gone to the town, into the town centre. So their sort of strategy was focusing around Clifton Road. Maybe she got into a car and just around that area. Even though I did say at the time, what about all the other roads? What about this? What about going to the other side of Worthing? No. And so the CCTV was retrieved in April, not long as soon as the case, it became a case investigation. It was retrieved, but it was obviously put somewhere and not looked at. And then it wasn't until Andy Wolstenholme came on the case in 2019, he got it assigned to look at, and then they found this footage. Also at the same time was obviously, this is where there was 13 pieces of CCTV that were lost, and which we only found out about in the review, which was in the following year. When we had the internal review. That's when they told us. We would never have known about it if they hadn't have told us. in the
It's
review.
just awful. Things like that they can never get back that could have had evidence on.
And we
And
never
it's-
got answers to how it got lost. You know, it was like, how did it get lost? Who was responsible? No answers to it. You know, and they just sort of like the chief constable and Joe Shiner and Emma Heaters just sort of said, oh well, you know, the police team believed that even if they hadn't have lost it, she wouldn't have been found. I said, well, you might, if you hadn't have lost it, there might have been other leads or other, you know, it might have shown something else, other just possibilities, other leads. That's what, you know, even so, and it's a crime that it's been lost anyway. This is a crime. Okay. It's been lost. It should never have been lost. How is this, you know? But we didn't get any answers to that. They self-referred themselves to the IOPC, and then I put in like several complaints, and they got sort of sent back to me, and they just said, well, you know, you've been apologised by the chief constable, and this is a learning curve, etc. And you know, I said, it's not a learning curve. It's not acceptable for us. My daughter's case is not a learning curve at all, and it's unacceptable. And I don't accept your apology. But I said I want to know who's responsible, because everyone is assigned to, you know, different jobs. You're in charge of doing the door to door. You're in charge of CCTV. You're in charge of whatever. But the reviewing officer just said that nobody seemed to really know who was in charge. But I complained because I said, well, it was his job then to find out, because that was his job, the reviewing officer, to get to the bottom of it and find out why the faults were. But when I requested another meeting to sort of go into it more, that it was refused. They said, you know, you've had the meeting. There was actually 27 failures. There was actually 27. But we wasn't told them all, because by the time he'd gone through like the main ones, he then got up and said he had to leave. So I requested another meeting. I said, I want to hear them all. And they said, well, sometimes they can't sort of reveal everything. Some things are very minor, like exhibits they've seized from places or things, and they haven't been labelled properly. And so this is sort of a failure. Minor things, they said, you know, that what they called minor things. So we didn't really get a list of the 27 things, but to us, the most important thing was the lost CCTV.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Can you just explain, have they ever explained to you why, without any leads, they've turned Georgina's case into a murder case? Because that doesn't happen normally for years unless there's some reason not to think she's...
So when Andy took it, it was after the first meeting in 2020. I think he said that he'd had a meeting with the NCA, and they'd recommended with him that they class this Georgina's case as a no-body homicide. And we said, how is that? You've got no evidence. And they said, because of the proof of life. He's exhausted all proof of life inquiries. You know, she's not been in contact with her family, friends, anybody she knows, no social media use, no bank account, and if the government websites, DWP or Job Centre or anything like that, or hospitals, NHS, there's just absolutely nothing. And they said that they can't prove that she's alive, but they can't prove that she's not alive either. But the NCA recommended that they record it as a no-body homicide. And I said, I can't accept that. That's not acceptable to us. Until there's some evidence. You haven't found any of her belongings. Nobody's come forward and said, I saw her coming to any harm at a party or anywhere. You know, nobody. Absolutely nobody. We've got lots of all these different stories of what could have happened, or what that one said, or what that one heard, but nobody has actually ever seen anything. And I said, I can't accept that. I'm not going to accept that until I always say I'm not naive, and I do realise and I do accept that there is a very, very strong possibility that she has come to some harm, and we do know that. We're not just living on that. All right, we don't accept it because we think she's alive, but I do think that, because I know Georgina, I know that she would try and get in contact in any way. I know people say, oh, she could have been trafficked, she could have that, and she can't get in contact with you. But I just know in Georgina, I just think if she'd been taken by against her will or something, I think after 6 years she would have just tried to. I just think and over this time we've had so many things. We had the person who contacted the local newspaper to say that they were holding her, they'd kidnapped her and they were holding her ransom, and the police said, oh, there's somebody who's claiming to have got Georgina and they want like so many thousands of bitcoins to give her back. They said that they were sort of trying to locate the IP address first, and it was a bit, what do you think? And we had to come up with some questions that to give them this person that only Georgina could know. We asked them questions and things. They never really responded with the direct answer to that question, but they come back with things like, oh, Georgina had a little black kitten when she was young, and initially, first of all, we thought, oh, how do they know that? That's even though I just thought, I don't believe this kidnapped story. Why would somebody kidnap her? We're not well off, we're not wealthy or anything like that. I just but the police said, we have to follow along with it. And I said, I agree. And so they never answered any of our questions directly. It was always something else. And then it was just, I think it was over about 3 days, and they asked for the money, and then the police said that we're not going to pay that money. They said if you don't pay it, we'll sort of we'll kill her and sort of dump her outside Worthing Hospital. And it wasn't. Then the police sort of come back a couple of days. They said, "Oh, we've located the IP address, and it's an IP address in South Africa." And
it's just a hoax.
And this IP address has also been used for other sort of scams and things. So then they said that they wasn't going to pay the money. So then they said they got back to and again, well, they'd actually contacted the guy from the Worthing Herald to stop. First of all, they contacted him before, and then they contacted newspapers along the south coast as well, and said the same thing. And then he contacted the police. And so when the police said we're not paying the money, they said, oh, well, pay half of it then.
Yeah,
pay half of it then. And I said, oh, this is just a hoax. And so we've had so many. Then we had another one that was a guy contacted me, and he said, oh, he worked for this guy, and he knows where my daughter is. And I said, well, where? He said, I can't tell you exactly. He said, I'm just sort of the mover. And I said, well, what do you mean the mover? He said, well, I just move people around. He said, that's what I get paid for. And I said, well, like what? He said, well, he said, your daughter's being moved from Germany to like Thailand. And I said, why? He said, oh, because the person I work for, he sells girls. And, so I sort of just carried on talking to him to try and find out more information. And I said, well, what, this went on over like 3 or 4 days. And I said, what happens? He said, I've just been given her name, that's all. And I found out who you are. And I wanted to contact you, to come to you first. And I said, well, what do you want from me? He said, well, he said, you can stop this. I said, how? He said, you need to go onto the dark web.
Oh, God.
I said, oh, well, how do I get there? He said, well, you go onto the dark web, and then the guy that I work for, he gave me a name, I've forgotten it now, he was German or something, and he said he'll send you a link on the dark web, and you go onto it, and then you have to pay the money on there. And I mean, I did start sort of Googling the dark web and that, and my daughters were going, "No, Mum, don't go on it, don't, you know." And you didn't go on the link. I said, "No, I didn't go on the link," but I did start Googling dark web and stuff, but I got scared, and I sort of, and I'd already told the police by then, and they had all the information. And then he even sent he sent me a copy of his boss's passport. He was a German guy, and he sent me, so the police had it, and they corresponded with the police in Germany, and they said this person doesn't exist.
Right, okay.
It doesn't even exist. And then the guy said, "Are you going to pay the money or not?" And I just sort of shut him down, and I blocked him then.
Can you tell us a little bit about the sighting of, well, we don't know if it's an actual sighting of what happened on the bridge, and the person that like contacted you then retracted it, because I think that's kind of an interesting part of her story.
That was, I think it was about May, and I was contacted by somebody who was sort of a follower of the page then. She only lives around the corner from me here, and I'd sort of chatted to her a few times, and she contacted me privately, and she said, "Oh, somebody, a lady who does my hair or something," she was a hairdresser, she said, when I saw her the other day, she told me, she was chatting about Georgina, and said that she saw her that night walking across the bridge with two guys, and one of them was sort of pulling her, and she was crying. And she said, so I said to her, "Are you going to tell the police?" And she said, "Oh, yeah." She just said, yeah. She said, "So I thought I'd tell you myself." And I tried to ask her more things, and she put me in contact with her. So I sort of texted her, and I said to her, and she said, yeah, I saw her. I said, "When was it?" He said, "It was March." She said to me, "It was March." It was definitely March, and it was that night. And I can't really remember what the one had, really short hair and that, and she was crying, and they seemed quite angry, and one seemed to be pulling her up by her arm. And so I contacted the police and gave them the information. I didn't hear from them for a couple of weeks, and then I sort of contacted them, and I said, "Well, what's happened about this?" "Oh, we went to see her, but she said it wasn't March. It could have been December, it might have been January, but it definitely wasn't March." And I said, "Well, she told me March, and she told the other girl March." "No," she said, "we went to see her, and we interviewed her and spoke to her, and she told us she definitely knows it wasn't March because she wasn't there in March or something, or she had something going on. She definitely..." I said, "Well, she's lied then, because she told me that." And I said, and I was angry. I said, "So, you know," I said, "she might be lying because she doesn't want to speak to you, or, you know, or something." And they said, no, we've got specially trained officers who know when people are lying and that." And I was just annoyed, and I just said, "Well, I could tell you a lie if I wanted to, and you'd believe it, you know." And so they sort of dismissed that then. In the meantime, I think she was still telling people that she'd sort of seen her that night. And then it was a couple of years later, and it was actually my boss at work who was a friend of hers, and she messaged me, and she said, "Oh, there's a friend of mine, a contact of mine on Facebook, and I've just seen it on her notifications and that she's been writing about it on her." I said, "Writing what?" And she said, "Oh, about that night and that." And she saw that she's just seen the guy who was with her, and it reminded her, and she's seen the same guy. And so she said, and I just said to her, "I don't think you should be writing that on your, you know, Facebook page." So I said, "Can you take a screenshot of it then?" And so she went back and she said she'd taken it off then. Anyway, my boss had sent me her number, and I said, "I've already got her number, actually." I said, because I spoke to her a couple of years ago. So I messaged her and I said about it, and she just said, "Yeah, it was just that I saw him in the shop. It was the same guy I saw on the bridge." I said, "Oh, well, can you tell the police this then?" And she said, "Yeah, I will do." And I said, I said again about that night when you saw it. Was it in March then? Because you said it was in March, didn't you? And she said, yeah, it was March, yeah. And so it was in this conversation in text. And I said, what, what happened? What side of the bridge was it on? And she said, oh, I was coming up of the Morrison side, and they were on the other side. And so I was walking my dog, and I thought it was a couple having a domestic. But on that time, she told me there was only one
Right.
guy. So, and she said, I went across and I just said, are you all right? And she just looked at me and she was crying, and she just said, yeah. She just went, yes. But he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. She said, and I just thought, oh, it's a couple having an argument, and walked off.
Right.
So, and then I sent it to the police again. I said, look, she said again, it's March to me. I said, here's the conversation. I said, and telling other people, I said, you need to speak to her again, because I think there's some truth in this.
Yeah, she's hiding something.
There's something. So they went to see her again, and she said the same thing again. No, it wasn't in March. I said, why is she saying that then to me? She said it to me. It's here in this screenshot. I said, she should get in trouble then for wasting police time. They said, oh, sometimes people want to be part of something, they're attention seekers, they want to be part of something, and they do things like this. And then sort of that was it. And then I texted her and I said, you said to me that. And then she said, can you stop hassling me, because I'm at work and you're bothering me? And I was like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble now probably. So
strange. Do you think she was doing it for attention, or do you think she's scared to come forward?
I just think, I don't know, because why would she say it and then afterwards say, well, it wasn't that day? If she was scared, why say it at all?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, a lot of people do try to get themselves involved. Did she know Georgina before? Did she know Georgina?
No. Then the police tried to say maybe she had seen them, but it was in December or January. I said, well, why did she say to me it was in March then? She'd been telling the other girl it was in March and telling me. And they said maybe it was, she had seen her, and that was, it was before that. Maybe she'd seen her before that.
Right. Have any of Georgina's current or ex-partners ever been seen as a suspect or looked into properly by the police?
They were sort of checked, and then the partner, he had his house forensic the same night as they did mine, and sort of he was taken for investigation, but they said that they couldn't find any links or anything suspicious. He wasn't a suspect. But then at the same time, when I asked them things about him or anybody else, they just say, well, everyone's a suspect until
it's still an open question.
Everyone's a suspect, and then they'll just say, oh, even you, everyone's a suspect. Because I sort of questioned and said, how can you just say that he's not? Surely he knows more about her life than he's letting on. I might not think he's responsible for her being missing, but I said, surely he knows more about her life than he's let on. She lived with him for 6 months. There must have been people she spoke to on the phone or text or chatted to him about, because she spent more time with him at that time than she did here. And she was close to him. She must have chatted to him about Karen or Bob or whatever, or my friend who, but they just said, no, he there's nothing he could tell us. Okay. Which I said I just said, well, I don't believe that. And when I said I didn't believe, they just said, oh, he's got, we don't believe he's responsible for her going missing or anything.
Okay. What about the Albanian guy?
Well, they said that they'd have checked him, they'd spoken to him several times. But on the last meeting we had with them, when I mentioned him, and they just said, oh, he's not in the country at the moment. And when I was talking to somebody else who was sort of helping us, they just said, oh, it's strange that they're keeping tabs on him though. They know he's not he's out of the country.
Okay. And have the boys' dads been ruled out?
Yeah, they said they went to see him, and they went to see his ex-partner, and they just said don't believe that he's got any links to it. They didn't speak. They hadn't spoken for years.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And have they found any of the stuff, like the clothing of Georgina, her phones, her bag? Nothing.
Nothing. And that's why I said I can't accept this no body homicide thing, because there's no actual evidence. You know, all right, keep it as still missing then, because you haven't. There's no evidence to say that she's come to any harm without, you know, they've never found any of that. We did have one day, it was just in the second lockdown, and they phoned me up and they said, oh, a homeless guy who sort of lives in this old church in the middle of Worthing, he's just found a big bag of stuff in the grounds there where he sort of sleeps, and he says that he thinks that the jacket's the same one as the missing girl. And at the time it was like, oh my God, you know, we were like, oh my, this, I think at that time I thought it really was, because I thought, well, he can't be wrong if he's said this, the jacket and the missing girl, and it was in the middle of Worthing, right in the middle. And they said, oh, we've got forensics going down there now, they're gonna set up a team and things like that, and we'll, you know, let you know the outcome. Okay. And a bit later, she sent me some photos of things like a purse and a jacket and things, but the jacket looked brown, and it was in this black bag, and there was lots of other things like CDs. And she said, do you recognise any of this? And I said, well, I looked at it, I said, I can't, looking at that like that, I can't say, yes, that's Georgina's, the coat looked brown. I said, maybe if it's been there a few years, it could have been. Yeah. I said, but I can't say, oh, yes, that is. Anyway, I think it took from August right round till January or February the next year to get any results back for forensics. It took ages. And then there was, in the purse, they said they couldn't find anything with the other things, but inside the purse was a SIM card and something else, and they had to carefully, that had to go off somewhere else because it had to be taken out and sort of restored. And then when they did actually locate the owner for it, was a girl who'd had her things stolen. Okay. And so, yeah, so that was sort of another 6-7 months that we went through of sort of waiting. And
so where do things like stand now? Like, are the police investigating any leads? Are they just doing nothing until things come to them? Like, their searches being done? Like, what's happening now?
They never did any searches, even though they say when they talk about what they've done, they say, oh, we've done 60 searches and things. And you know, I've said, well, where have you searched? And you've not actually done searches. They said, well, you know, when we've got warrants to check premises and things, or checked alleyways, and we checked that alleyway, and we looked at that bit of empty land by the, you know, in the town, there's a piece of that land, and it says on the report, the police officer stood on a chair to look over this fence, and I said, well, that's not to me, that's not a search.
No, it's not a search. What about helicopters, dogs, and all
no, they didn't, nothing like that. They said there's never, when they've liaised with Pulsar, is it Solsar and Pulsar, they said that there's not enough evidence to search anywhere. That, you know, no one's ever said that she's been seen in certain places. Like the same with Teville Gate, the car park which was being demolished at the same time as Georgina went missing. And I asked them, I said, can you know, this was being demolished the same week. There could be a possibility, because people were messaging me then, and it was just going mad. And, you know, I hadn't really thought about it myself much. But then when I was getting all these messages, and I couldn't sleep at night. I remember the first weekend, I was awake all weekend, and I was emailing them, and nobody was answering me. And I was sort of saying, you know, about the safety of it. Do they check it each time they come into work in the morning? Do they do a health and safety check to make sure nobody's in there? And, you know, that's when the second sort of DCI said something about, like, oh, I suggest you get some professional counselling. And I was annoyed with that, because I didn't think it was right, him saying that to me. You know, I said, I'm a mum. My daughter's been missing. No, I've got no idea what's happened to her at all. And it's been like, 2 years now, and have to live with this every day. and I, have absolutely no idea. And you're telling me to seek some professional counselling to help, just because you don't want me to keep emailing you and asking questions, or asking you, can we find out from the company, the demolition company, can I see can we see their safety log, or their daily, to find out what happens to the stuff that they take out, how is it checked, or anything like that. And he just said that it's not relevant, there's no link to Georgina and Tevil Gate. And I said, well, how do you know? You don't know. Why can't you rule it out? Can you just get some dogs in there and just rule it out? And they just said no. We don't just go in willy-nilly searching places, areas.
I just don't get it at all, because even they'd search local wooded areas, normally search any place where Georgina could be and organise those searches. Like, everyone who goes missing normally would have those at least basic searches, and like near the sea, on the coastal areas. I just don't understand why they've never searched.
I said, what about like the coastal, the people who do the tides, the specialists who do all when the tides come in or out. I've forgotten the names of them now. And I said, have you spoken to one of those who can tell you about the tides and things? And he just said, oh, well, yeah, we do all that. And she would have been washed up somewhere if she'd have was in the sea, but we don't believe that. And they, not long after she went missing, they said, oh, we've done this sort of strategic thing where we feed all this information into a computer, and of like, say, 20 different missing girls, sort of say from the south, and we feed all their information in what they're like and things, and then the computer will come back with where they're most likely to be found. And I sort of found that weird. I thought, how is a computer going to tell you where a missing person is going to be found? And they said with Georgina, because of her erratic lifestyle, it couldn't really give us it didn't really help. Whereas with other ones, it'll say, oh, she's most likely to be found by the sea for some reason, or most likely to be found there. But they couldn't do some of these things, and I said, well, I thought that's strange, isn't it? Feeding it into a computer and expecting it to tell you where they're going to be found.
It's really strange. So when was like the last bit of kind of any leads that come out, any updates you got from the police, like kind of anything news that you had about Georgina at all?
I sort of spoke to I've emailed them several times the past sort of month, because there was somebody who comes on our page, the Facebook page, and he sort of said that he thinks he can help, but not because he knows anything, but because he was missing for 4 or 5 times in his life, and he went missing, and most missing people go to seaside towns. And and me and John said, well, we live in a seaside town, how is that going to help? We live in a seaside town. And John said, well, Georgina wasn't actually, you wasn't a missing, you was a runaway, because he was a runaway. He went off his own. It's not the same. And he said, no, he knows lots of people, and he's been involved in crime and etc. And what he would do, he would probably leave the country. He said, if I was in any trouble, and he said, I think she was in some trouble, and she's left the country, and that was it. And so I gave the information to the police, but they didn't seem that sort of enamoured by it. They just said they were looking into it, obviously. And why is he taking so long to contact you? It's taken 6 years to contact you and saying this to you. They just said, as well as we do, that there's quite a lot of people out there with sort of ready to say things like this.
Stories, everyone wants to be here. Everyone wants to be involved.
I think the meeting before 2 years ago, they told us that they were sort of because they didn't know what else to do. They were looking at all the ex-criminals that were in Worthing around that time, sort of ex-paedophiles and things like that. Just all these who were well known at that time, to see if they could, if they were in Worthing at that time when Georgina went missing. And then when we had the meeting last year, I said, what happened with that, cross-referencing all the criminals and things? And they said, well, it's quite a hard thing to do because some of them maybe are in prison, some of them are dead, and we haven't managed to sort of locate many at all, or right. it's just something extra to do, and sort of that was it really. But there's not really been any. They've not contacted me and said we've had this important information come in. They just said last year they said they said the information now hasn't been for the past 2 years. There's hardly nobody's coming, and like in the first couple of years, people were coming with the same stories and what they'd heard off their friends or what they'd heard around Worthing, and that somebody else would say, "Oh, I heard this." They said that even that stopped, and nobody comes forward now with any of that sort of those stories. We haven't had that for 2 or 3 years. He said, unfortunately, as the case gets older, it's gonna eventually stop, and we'll just have to wait for someone to come forward who knows something and to solve this case. And that's the only way, really, we believe it's going to be solved, is if somebody comes forward. And that's. Do you have any
feelings? Like, do you have any feelings more than others? Like, what could have happened? Because obviously, you said she was acting quite normally. She seemed hopeful for the future, so it's not likely she's like unalived herself. She was looking forward to things with the boys, looking at flats.
I don't think she unalived herself. I don't. They, even though in the beginning they had about 11 or 12 hypotheses in the very beginning, and then it sort of went down to 7, and then the very last time it's been 3, and it's come to some harm unintentionally or come to harm intentionally, which doesn't help, does it? Because unaliving. And I said, well, why is that? Because they said because they had to put that in because the National Crime Agency recommend that they put that in.
So they definitely have ruled out Georgina just going missing by herself. Like
I said, I asked at the internal review and to the reviewing officer, and I said, what's the % of somebody after you have said this is a no-body homicide? What's the percentage of people that actually turn up or are found? And he said there isn't, and that really put me down then, because I thought he was going to say like 10% or something, or come up with something, but it was actually nothing, and I was quite shocked.
Some though, she had a head injury and she'd forgotten who she was. Or do you?
They said none of there's not been any that have, once they've said this is a no-body homicide, there's never been a case where they have come back or found them or anything like that. And he said she could, like the team said, she could have gone to a party and come to harm by somebody gave her something or she took something, and it's not intentional or or intentional, but that's their sort of final things, what they believe.
And did they rule out things like trafficking and stuff like that? I know it's really hard to talk about to your mum. I hate bringing it up, but obviously
in the beginning they said they put it in their hypothesis, but they didn't believe it. She had been. They said that it's not women of her age of 30 that get trafficked. It's usually very young girls, and they get trafficked into the country, and it's not in their they're not thinking that's what happened. And then they sort of, the next time we had a meeting, they sort of ruled that out.
Okay. Is there anything for people watching now? Is there anything people can do to help? Is like flyering, putting money towards posters? Like, is there a GoFundMe? Is there like a petition? Is there anything we can do to help you?
We've done all the petitions. I've done the we did a petition to the Home Office for the police to look into the case more, because I didn't think that enough was being done. This was in 2019. And that got sent back to us, and I think it was Priti Patel at the time, and she said that the police are dealing with it and they're the best ones to deal with it, and that was it. So sort of shut us down. We did another petition to the local council because I was trying to get a petition to sort of try and enforce really the police to do a search of Tevilgate, to do some search. And they said, we got a petition up, and they said that it was nothing really to do with them, it was the police. And the police just sort of said that, we can't just go searching because of funds and things like that, limited funds. They only search place areas where somebody had been seen. That's when I said, well, I'll go in there and search myself then. And that's when I climbed the gate, and I said, well, I could get in. I got in myself, and I'm like, I was 57 years old then at the time, 57 years old. I climbed that 12 foot fence and got in, just to prove that. And they said, yes, but it'd be different if it was some guy, some 6 foot guy was trying to carry a body out. I said, well, I'm not actually saying that, I'm just saying I just want to say, because they tried to say it was all secure, but I had several people sort of contact me and say, oh, I live there, I live in the block of flats that overlooks it, and we see people in there sitting in there drinking at night and going in there, and my point was I wanted to try and show that it's not secure. People go in there. And then when I got out of there and we walked around the corner, in the fence around the corner, there was a hole in the fence where I could have just walked under.
Yeah, and also things like it could be someone who's working on the site, who has access to the site, who literally, it could be anyone coming and going, and there's always ways to get into somewhere. It's not like he climbed up 12 foot with Georgina. Do you know what I mean? That's ridiculous. But normally they would do some searching, like ground penetration radar.
They said that, then Andy said that he went and spoke to the site manager, because we contacted them. They were called Mosaic. It was a company who bought it. We contacted them and said about doing searches. We were trying to get people ourselves, and we were contacting, independent companies with sniffer dogs and things like that, asking if they could help. Most of them wouldn't help because the police
wouldn't ask.
The police wouldn't. The police had said no. They were only willing to do anything if the police were going to work with them. So they sort of said, no, we can't do anything. What's the position of the police? So we contacted the company. They said they would go. They would willingly let searches go on as long as the police, if the police said they were happy to do it, which the police said no, they wasn't, because there was no. But then Andy went to see the site and he said that they did searches, but what they actually did was he lifted a drain up and they put a camera down the drain. Right. And he said we did searches. We put a camera down one of the drains to see what was down there, and I'm quite satisfied that nobody. And I said, well, it's not a search, is it? What about when it was demolished and things? He said they told him that all the rubble and when they demolish it is sold off in truckloads and goes to different places. He said, and it's all weighed and things like that, and there's no way that a body would be sort of transported out on a truck unnoticed. It would have been noticed. And he said, I just want to reassure you. And I said, it's not really reassuring. It's not.
No, they just don't want to seem to rule anything out properly by actually going and doing it.
I said, what does it take for you to get some dogs in there to snip? Just, give me that, let's satisfy that for me, to at least just to say that you had those dogs in there, to rule that out. And they said, well, I've looked in there and I've spoken to the site manager, and he said there's no way that, anybody would leave this site on a truck unnoticed. All these trucks are weighed as they go out, because the rubble and everything sold to different places, and I can assure you that I don't believe Georgina was there, and I just said, well, why can't you just do that? That's all I'm asking, is do that, the dog search. But they didn't. They just
Can I just ask everyone who's in it, there's 704 of you, if you all follow Andrea's profile, and you all just take a day out of today, or 10 minutes out of today, or 10 minutes out of tomorrow, and just go and repost every single video. Because when you repost a video, it hits all of your followers and all of everyone else's followers. And those videos that may have like 1,000 views may get 100,000 views. And more people will be aware of Georgina's case. And also the people that do have that information may feel pressured to come forward. So every little thing like that helps. And then you get to see everything Andrea posts in the future, all the updates if there are any, and you just get to make her feel at least somebody's listening and somebody cares where Georgina is, because this could be your daughter, your sister, it could be your mum. So if everyone could do that, it'd be absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Is there anything else we can help with at all?
No, just, yeah, I mean, if anyone can help put up posters, we've got poster packs that I send out to people anywhere, because, you know, it could be anybody, could have been in Worthing at the time. And I've been sending out poster packs for the past 6 years to different, all over the country. I mean, I even took some myself to Morocco and put them there when I went, and I've had people take them to Spain. But if anyone anywhere in the UK can put, you know, if they can just email us on our email, or DM us on our TikTok messenger, and I can send a pack out. I'd really appreciate that.
Is there any way we could just like download them from, so you don't have to send them out yourself? Because that could give you money.
Yeah, we have got some on our link tree in the bio, and on the TikTok page. There's some there with all
if people take them out and put them in their local areas, and then message you and say, I've done this area. Yeah. Just kind of you keep, and obviously if everyone can do that, I know I can do definitely down here in Devon. You know, even if you're going somewhere with the kids, to a park, to local area, like down to the beach, whatever, if you just take even 10, 20, 30 posters and just put some around your area, you may be the person that sparks the tip that comes forward that brings Georgina home, and lets her boys know what's happened to her and her mum. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. I know you've got your hands full with the boys and work and everything else you've got going on. Like, honestly, I would do anything I can in the world to help you, and obviously keep in contact.
I really appreciate it.
Even we do lives every 3 months or whatever, and just new people come in and just keep talking about Georgina, because it's so important to do.
Thank you.